Sometimes the hardest person to run away from is the one who never chased you. I kept telling myself that avoiding Noah Brooks would make everything easier, but every plan I made seemed to push us closer instead. 3 days had passed since that awkward moment on my parents' back porch. The moment our eyes met a little too long, and the quiet between us suddenly felt heavier than words. Nothing dramatic had happened. There had been no confession, no grand gesture, not even another accidental brush of hands. Yet somehow my entire world had tilted by a few impossible degrees. I woke up thinking about him, spent lectures pretending to pay attention while replaying every conversation we had ever shared, and fell asleep wondering why my heart insisted on making something ordinary feel dangerously important. Noah had always been my older brother Liam's best friend. He had been around since I was 14, showing up at birthday parties, family barbecues, football games, and holiday dinners with that same calm smile that somehow made every room feel quieter. To me, he had always been the responsible one, the dependable one, the guy who remembered everyone's coffee order and never forgot to ask how finals were going. I had admired him the way a younger kid admires someone who already seems to have life figured out. At least, that was what I used to believe. Monday afternoon, Liam called while I was walking across campus. "Hey, little brother," he said. "I've got to fly to Seattle for work tomorrow. 3 weeks, maybe 4. Okay," I answered, balancing my backpack higher on one shoulder. What does that have to do with me? There was a pause that immediately made me suspicious. Noah's apartment is getting renovated. Pipes burst upstairs. He needs somewhere to stay. I stopped walking. Students brushed past me while my stomach tightened for reasons I refused to examine. So, I told him he could use my room. My mouth went dry. "You what?" "Relax. Mom already said yes." I looked toward the parking lot, watching sunlight bounce across rows of windshields as if the universe had suddenly become too bright. "You didn't think to ask me?" Liam laughed. "Why would I? You two get along great." If only he knew. "It's temporary," he continued. "Besides, somebody should make sure you're actually eating vegetables." Very funny. He'll be there tonight. Before I could invent another excuse, the call ended. The rest of the afternoon disappeared beneath a strange fog. I couldn't focus during studio class. My pencil hovered above unfinished sketches while my mind kept circling the same impossible sentence. Noah was moving in. Not next door. Not across town. Into our house. Into the hallway outside my bedroom. Into breakfasts, late-night conversations, quiet weekends, and all the ordinary moments I had relied on to forget whatever had started growing inside me. When I finally got home, his pickup truck was already parked in the driveway. I stood outside for nearly a full minute, gripping my keys so tightly the metal edges pressed into my palm. It felt ridiculous. He was just Noah, just Liam's best friend, just the man I had known for years. I opened the front door anyway. The familiar smell of fresh coffee drifted from the kitchen. "Hey, Ethan." His voice reached me before I saw him. Warm, relaxed, completely normal. He stepped into the hallway carrying a cardboard box, wearing a faded gray t-shirt and jeans, a few loose strands of dark hair falling across his forehead. "Good timing," he said with an easy smile. "Your mom already put me to work." I laughed before I could stop myself. "That sounds about right. Think you could help me carry the rest?" I nodded automatically. For the next hour, we moved books, lamps, and clothes from his truck into Liam's room, talking about traffic, work, baseball, and absolutely everything except the one thing that had quietly changed inside me. Noah acted exactly the same as always, comfortable and kind, completely unaware of the storm I was trying so hard to hide. Somehow that made it worse. Because if nothing had changed for him, why did every ordinary second suddenly feel unforgettable for me? The next morning, I woke to the smell of fresh coffee long before my alarm had a chance to ring. For a few quiet seconds, I forgot why my heart suddenly felt restless, but the memory returned the moment I opened my bedroom door and heard someone humming softly in the kitchen. "Noah." I stood in the hallway longer than I should have, taking a slow breath before forcing myself to walk downstairs as though nothing had changed. Sunlight poured through the windows, painting warm stripes across the hardwood floor. Noah was standing at the stove making breakfast while my mother packed her lunch for work. The scene looked so natural that it almost felt like he had always belonged there. "Morning," he said with the same relaxed smile he had worn yesterday. "I hope you like pancakes because your mom insisted I help." I laughed quietly. She insists on a lot of things. My mother pointed a spatula toward me. Sit down before everything gets cold. I obeyed without another word. Breakfast should have been simple. We talked about the weather, my architecture project, Noah's shift at the hospital, and Liam's flight to Seattle. Nothing unusual happened. Yet every time Noah looked at me to ask a question or slid the syrup across the table without being asked, I became painfully aware of how carefully I was watching him. I hated that I noticed little things now, like the way he always thanked my mother after every meal, or how he tucked a loose strand of hair behind his ear whenever he was thinking. They were ordinary habits, but somehow they refused to leave my mind. After breakfast, my mother grabbed her purse and smiled at both of us. You boys are heading the same direction, right? Before I could answer, Noah nodded. I can drive Ethan to campus. You do not have to, I said quickly. It is on my way, he replied. Save your gas money. 10 minutes later, I found myself sitting in the passenger seat of his truck, staring out the window while soft classic rock played through the speakers. The silence between us was comfortable for him, but for me it was filled with thoughts I could not organize. Noah finally glanced over with an amused expression. You have been unusually quiet since yesterday. I forced a smile. Just thinking about school. Big project. Huge project. He nodded as if he believed me completely. You will do fine. You always work harder than you think you do. Such a simple sentence should not have mattered, yet it settled somewhere deep inside me. Noah had always noticed things about me that even I overlooked. When we reached campus, I reached for the door handle, but his voice stopped me. Hey, Ethan. I turned back. Good luck today. Thanks. He smiled again before driving away, leaving me standing on the sidewalk watching his truck disappear into traffic. The rest of the day felt strangely empty. During class, I caught myself checking the time, wondering whether Noah had finished his morning rounds. While my friends debated design concepts over lunch, I barely listened. My phone buzzed once just after 3 o'clock. It was a text from Noah. Your mom asked if you wanted takeout tonight. Any requests? I stared at the message longer than necessary before typing back. Anything is fine. A few seconds later, another message appeared. That sounds like something Liam would say. Try again. Without realizing it, I smiled at my screen. Maybe burgers? Good choice. See you tonight. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, but the smile refused to disappear. It was ridiculous how 4 ordinary words could brighten an entire afternoon. I kept reminding myself that Noah treated everyone with the same kindness, that none of this meant anything beyond simple friendship. Even so, as I walked home beneath the fading orange sky, one impossible thought refused to leave me. If spending a single day this close to him already felt different, how was I supposed to survive an entire month living under the same roof? By the end of the first week, I had started measuring my days in ordinary moments that somehow never felt ordinary anymore. The sound of Noah leaving for the hospital before sunrise. The quiet knock on my bedroom door whenever he noticed I had fallen asleep over my textbooks. The way he always remembered to buy my favorite blueberry yogurt whenever he stopped at the grocery store, even though I had never once asked him to. None of those things should have mattered. They were the kinds of thoughtful gestures Noah probably made for everyone. That was exactly what I kept telling myself. Saturday morning arrived with no classes and no deadlines. I wandered downstairs expecting an empty kitchen, but Noah was already there with a mug of coffee in one hand and a newspaper spread across the counter. He looked up and smiled as naturally as if we had shared mornings together for years. Good morning, he said. I was thinking about making breakfast. Any requests? Anything is fine, I answered. He laughed softly. You really have to stop saying that. People should have favorites. I shrugged. I guess I never think about it. Then today you are choosing. I stared at the refrigerator for several seconds before admitting, French toast. Good choice. While he cooked, I leaned against the counter watching sunlight fill the room. The silence between us never felt awkward. It was calm, comfortable, almost peaceful. Noah occasionally asked about school or told me funny stories from the hospital that carefully protected his patients' privacy while still making me laugh. He never tried too hard to keep the conversation alive. Somehow that made talking to him even easier. After breakfast, my mother left to visit my grandmother for the afternoon. Suddenly, the house belonged only to the two of us. Noah gathered the empty plates. Want to help me wash these? Sure. We stood shoulder to shoulder at the sink, passing dishes back and forth without thinking. At one point, our hands brushed while reaching for the same towel. It lasted less than a second. Noah simply apologized with an easy smile before continuing to dry another plate. My pulse, however, refused to return to normal. He did not notice. Or maybe there was nothing to notice except my own imagination. Later that afternoon, Liam called on video chat from Seattle. Noah answered first because his phone happened to be closer. Within seconds, they were laughing about some college memory neither of them had ever told me before. I watched from the couch, smiling politely while an unfamiliar feeling settled quietly inside my chest. It was not anger. It was not sadness. It was something smaller and somehow heavier. I realized there were entire chapters of Noah's life that had nothing to do with me, years of memories he shared with Liam that I could never be part of. The thought surprised me more than it should have. When the call ended, Noah noticed my expression. Everything all right? I looked away too quickly. Yes, just tired. He studied me for a brief moment before nodding. You have been carrying a lot lately. Do not forget to take care of yourself too. There it was again. That quiet kindness. That effortless concern. He spoke the same way he always had, completely unaware that every thoughtful word seemed to leave a deeper mark than the last. That evening we watched a baseball game in the living room. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we simply listened to the announcers. Neither of us seemed bothered by the comfortable silence. As the game reached the final inning, Noah stretched, stood up, and smiled. I am turning in early. Early shift tomorrow. Good night, I said. Good night, Ethan. He disappeared upstairs without another thought, but I remained on the couch long after the television had gone quiet. I finally understood what frightened me most. Nothing about Noah had changed. He was still the same patient, dependable, thoughtful man he had always been. The only person changing was me, and with every ordinary day we shared beneath the same roof, it became harder to convince myself that what I felt was only admiration. Monday arrived with gray clouds hanging low over the city, promising rain that never seemed to fall. I spent the entire morning trying to focus on my presentation, but every sketch on my drafting table blurred together until my professor finally reminded me that class had ended 5 minutes earlier. My friends laughed about weekend plans as we walked across campus, yet I barely heard them. Somewhere along the way, my attention had developed a frustrating habit of drifting toward one person, even when he was nowhere nearby. My phone buzzed just after noon. It was a message from Noah. I have a late shift tonight. Do not wait for dinner. There was nothing unusual about the text. It was practical, considerate, exactly the kind of message he would send anyone sharing the same house. Even so, I caught myself smiling before I quickly slipped the phone back into my pocket. Who is making you grin like that? My classmate Emma asked. Nobody, I answered too quickly. She raised an eyebrow, but let it go. That evening I heated leftovers and ate alone while my mother worked late. The house felt strangely quiet without Noah's easy footsteps moving through the hallway. I had almost convinced myself that I was simply getting used to having another person around when headlights swept across the front window close to 9 o'clock. I heard the front door open, followed by familiar footsteps and the soft sound of Noah setting his keys on the table. Long day, I asked as he walked into the kitchen. Very long, he admitted with a tired smile. But nothing a decent meal cannot fix. He thanked me when I offered to warm up another plate, and for a few peaceful minutes we talked about completely ordinary things. Then his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and answered immediately. Hi, Claire. I had never heard that name before. I looked down at my glass of water, pretending not to listen, but her cheerful voice carried faintly through the speaker. Noah laughed, a genuine laugh that I had come to recognize over the past week. Tomorrow? Yes, I think I can make that work, he said. Dinner sounds nice. Something tightened quietly inside my chest. I told myself it was none of my business. Noah was 26 years old. He could have dinner with anyone he wanted. There was absolutely no reason for the unexpected disappointment that settled over me. He ended the call a minute later and looked back at me with the same relaxed expression. Sorry about that. No problem, I replied, forcing my voice to sound normal. Friend from work? Yes, Claire is one of the new physicians. She has been trying to organize a group dinner for weeks. I nodded as though the explanation should have erased every uncomfortable feeling. Instead, my imagination immediately pictured someone confident, intelligent, and closer to Noah's stage of life than I could ever be. Someone who understood his long shifts and demanding schedule. Someone who belonged naturally in his world. The rest of dinner passed without difficulty, Yet I noticed myself speaking less than usual. Noah eventually tilted his head with quiet curiosity. You seem distracted tonight. Just tired. He smiled gently. Architecture students and medical staff have something in common. What is that? Neither group knows when to take a break. I laughed because it was easier than admitting the truth. Later that night, I stood by my bedroom window watching light rain finally begin to fall across the neighborhood. Down below, Noah stepped onto the back porch with a mug of tea, looking up at the cloudy sky as though enjoying the peaceful silence after a long day. I could have joined him. We had shared dozens of quiet conversations already. Instead, I stayed hidden behind the curtain, wondering why the simple thought of another person inviting him to dinner had left me feeling so unexpectedly empty. That was the moment I stopped pretending the feeling would disappear on its own. Whatever had quietly taken root inside my heart was no longer simple admiration, and denying it was becoming harder with every passing day. The next morning, I made a decision that sounded reasonable only because I repeated it often enough to almost believe it. I was simply confused. Nothing more. Noah had been part of my life for years, and spending so much time around him had blurred the lines between admiration and something else. Once he moved back into his own apartment, everything would return to normal. That was the story I kept telling myself as I walked across campus beneath a bright blue sky. It was a comforting explanation, even if my heart refused to cooperate. I buried myself in assignments, volunteered to stay late in the design studio, and even agreed to have lunch with classmates instead of going straight home. If I stayed busy enough, maybe my thoughts would finally settle down. Emma noticed the change almost immediately. You have been hiding in the architecture building all week, she said while we carried our trays through the student center. Trying to break some kind of record? Just a lot to finish, I answered. She smiled knowingly. Or maybe you were trying not to think about something. I laughed awkwardly. You watch too many romantic movies. Maybe, she admitted, but people always get quiet when they are sorting out their feelings. Her words stayed with me long after lunch ended. That evening, I arrived home later than usual, hoping Noah would already be out with his coworkers. Instead, I found him sitting on the back porch reading a novel while the last light of sunset painted the yard in shades of gold. He looked up as soon as he heard the screen door open. There you are, he said. Your mother was starting to wonder if you were living in the studio. The project is keeping me busy. You still have to eat. He lifted a paper bag from the chair beside him. I picked up your favorite turkey sandwich because I figured you might skip dinner. I accepted the bag with a quiet thank you, surprised once again by how naturally he noticed things that I never mentioned. We sat together in comfortable silence while birds drifted across the evening sky. Eventually Noah closed his book. Can I ask you something? My stomach tightened. Sure. Have I done something to upset you lately? I looked at him in surprise. What do you mean? You seem different. You leave earlier, come home later, and disappear into your room more often. If I said something without realizing it, I would rather know. His expression carried only genuine concern, and that somehow made the conversation even harder. I wanted to tell him the truth, not because I expected anything in return, but because pretending had become exhausting. Instead, I forced a small smile. You did not do anything wrong. Then what changed? I looked down at the untouched sandwich resting in my hands. Nothing. I have just been stressed about school. He accepted the answer without pressing further, but I could tell he was not completely convinced. Well, he said softly, if you ever need to talk, I am here. Such a simple promise should not have shaken me the way it did. After he went inside, I remained on the porch alone, listening to the gentle sound of crickets as darkness settled over the neighborhood. I finally admitted something I had been trying to avoid for days. I was not afraid because Noah had changed. I was afraid because every act of kindness, every thoughtful gesture, every ordinary conversation made it harder to imagine my life without him in it. No matter how many times I insisted that this was only confusion, my heart quietly answered with the same impossible truth. I was no longer trying to stop myself from falling. I was only pretending that I already had not. Rain arrived just after midnight, tapping softly against my bedroom window with a steady rhythm that should have made it easy to sleep. Instead, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation I had shared with Noah over the past 2 weeks. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, I finally drifted into a restless sleep, only for my alarm to pull me awake a few hours later with a pounding headache and an ache that settled deep behind my eyes. I blamed it on exhaustion and forced myself through a shower before heading downstairs. Noah looked up from his coffee the moment I entered the kitchen. "You do not look like yourself today," he said quietly. "I am fine," I answered, reaching for a glass of water. "You are pale. Just tired." He studied me for another second, but did not argue. "At least eat something before class." I managed half a piece of toast before leaving the house. By noon, my concentration had completely disappeared. The lines on my drafting paper seemed to blur together, and every step across campus felt heavier than the last. When Emma touched my forehead, her expression immediately changed. "Ethan, you are burning up. It is probably just a cold. You are going home. I still have work to finish." "No," she said firmly. "You are going home." Too exhausted to argue, I called a rideshare and somehow made it back to the house. I barely remembered climbing the stairs before collapsing onto my bed. The room faded in and out around me until a gentle knock pulled me awake some time later. "Ethan," Noah's voice drifted through the door. "Are you home?" I tried to answer, but my voice came out weak and hoarse. A moment later, the door opened slightly. Noah stepped inside, still wearing his hospital identification badge, concern immediately replacing the tired smile he had brought home from work. "You came home early." I nodded faintly. He crossed the room and rested the back of his hand against my forehead. His expression softened. "You have a fever. I will be okay. You are not fooling anyone." He disappeared downstairs and returned a few minutes later carrying a thermometer, a glass of water, and a bowl of warm soup. The entire routine felt so natural that it was obvious he had taken care of countless people before me. Yet somehow every small gesture felt deeply personal. He adjusted the blanket when it slipped from my shoulder, reminded me to drink slowly, and checked the thermometer again after a while. 101 degrees, he said. "Nothing too serious, but you need rest." "I am sorry," I murmured. "For what?" "Ruining your evening." Noah actually laughed. "Taking care of someone who is sick is hardly a ruined evening." He pulled a chair beside my bed and opened the novel he had been reading earlier that week. "Try to sleep. I will stay until your fever comes down." I wanted to tell him that he did not have to stay. I wanted to remind him that he had worked a long shift and deserved to rest. Instead, I simply watched him turn another page beneath the warm glow of my bedside lamp. Every now and then he glanced up to ask if I needed more water or another blanket. His voice remained calm, patient, reassuring. At some point, I finally drifted back to sleep with the quiet sound of pages turning in the background. For the first time in days, my thoughts stopped racing. When I woke again well after midnight, the room was almost completely dark except for the small reading lamp still glowing beside my bed. Noah had fallen asleep in the chair, his book resting loosely across his lap. He had stayed exactly as he promised. I watched him for a long moment, overwhelmed by a feeling that no longer frightened me because it had become impossible to deny. The safest place I had found in weeks was not my room, not my home, but simply knowing that Noah was still there when I opened my eyes. Morning sunlight filtered through the curtains when I opened my eyes again, and for one quiet second I forgot why the room felt different. Then I noticed the blanket had been pulled neatly over my shoulders, the glass of water on the nightstand had been replaced with a fresh one, and the chair beside my bed was empty. I slowly sat up, surprised to discover that the fever had almost disappeared. My body still felt weak, but the heavy fog inside my head had finally begun to lift. I found Noah downstairs standing at the kitchen counter, pouring coffee into a travel mug while reading something on his phone. When he looked up and saw me, relief immediately softened his expression. "You should still be in bed," he said. "I am feeling much better." He stepped closer and rested the back of his hand lightly against my forehead before nodding with quiet satisfaction. "Your temperature is almost normal." I smiled. "You really stayed all night." "I told you I would." He answered so naturally that it sounded like there had never been another option. "You have work today?" I said. I already switched part of my schedule with another physician. They owed me a favor. I stared at him without knowing what to say. "You did not have to do that." Noah shrugged gently. "Sometimes people need someone to look after them. That is not a burden." Those words stayed with me long after he left for the hospital. The house was unusually quiet, giving me far too much time to think. Everywhere I looked, I found small reminders of him. The folded blanket he had brought upstairs during the night. The medicine sitting neatly beside a handwritten note reminding me to drink plenty of water. Even the soup pot soaking in the sink carried evidence that someone had quietly cared for me without asking for anything in return. Until now, I had kept insisting that what I felt was temporary, something caused by spending too much time together. But temporary feelings did not survive moments like these. Temporary feelings did not grow stronger after seeing someone sacrifice sleep simply to make sure you were comfortable. Late that afternoon, I wandered into the living room and noticed one of Noah's books resting on the coffee table. A folded bookmark slipped out as I picked it up. It was not really a bookmark at all, but an old receipt. On the back, written in careful handwriting, were a few words that made me stop breathing for a moment. Be kind whenever you can. People remember how you make them feel long after they forget what you said. There was no signature, no explanation. Somehow those simple words described Noah better than anything else ever could. He had always lived that way, quietly making the people around him feel seen, valued, and safe. I realized then that I had fallen in love not because of one unforgettable moment, but because of hundreds of ordinary ones that had slowly changed the way I looked at the world. That evening, Noah returned home carrying a small paper bag from the neighborhood bakery. I figured you might finally have your appetite back, he said, placing it on the counter. Inside were my favorite cinnamon rolls. I laughed softly. How do you always know? Because you always smile when you see them. Such an ordinary answer should not have felt so overwhelming. We shared dessert while talking about books, music, and childhood memories, and for a little while I almost forgot how complicated everything had become. But when Noah laughed at one of my terrible jokes and looked at me with the same familiar warmth he had always shown, the truth settled inside me with complete certainty. Somewhere along the way, without realizing it, I had stopped seeing him as my brother's best friend or even as the dependable older person I admired growing up. When I looked at Noah now, I saw the person my heart searched for first in every room, and no matter how hard I tried, I could no longer pretend that feeling was anything less than love. The days that followed felt strangely fragile, as if one careless word could shatter the quiet balance we had somehow created. Noah was exactly the same as he had always been. He still asked how my classes were going every morning. He still left encouraging notes beside the coffee maker whenever he worked an early shift. He still remembered the smallest details about my day without ever making it seem like an effort. The only difference was that now I understood why every one of those moments stayed with me long after they were over. I had finally admitted the truth to myself, but I had no idea what to do with it. Keeping it hidden was painful, yet saying it out loud felt impossible. One Friday evening, after another long week of classes, my mother announced that she would be spending the night at my aunt's house to help prepare for a family gathering. The house suddenly became unusually quiet. Noah was sitting on the back porch with a cup of tea, watching the last colors of sunset disappear beyond the trees. I stepped outside without thinking. He looked over and smiled. Feeling completely better? Yes, I answered. Thanks to you. He waved the compliment away with an embarrassed smile. I only did what anyone would have done. I wanted to tell him that was not true. Not everyone would have stayed awake through the night. Not everyone would have rearranged work schedules, or remembered my favorite food, or quietly made another person feel important every single day. But the words remained trapped somewhere inside me. We sat together listening to the soft chorus of crickets while a cool breeze drifted through the yard. After several peaceful minutes, Noah finally spoke. My apartment manager called today. My heart tightened before he finished the sentence. The repairs are almost done. I turned toward him slowly. Already? He nodded. Everything should be finished by next weekend. I will probably move back then. The porch suddenly felt colder. I stared across the dark lawn, trying to keep my expression calm even though disappointment spread through my chest with surprising force. This was always supposed to happen. His stay had only been temporary. Nothing about this should have surprised me. That is good, I managed to say. Yes. He hesitated before continuing. Your family has been incredibly generous. I do not want to overstay my welcome. Before I could stop myself, the words escaped. You are not. Noah looked at me with quiet curiosity. What? I swallowed hard. You are not overstaying. Nobody wants you to leave. For a brief second, neither of us spoke. His expression softened in a way I could not quite understand. That means a lot to hear, he said gently. Then he stood, brushing invisible dust from his jeans. I should finish packing a few things this weekend. Something inside me refused to let the conversation end there. As he started walking toward the back door, I acted before I had time to think. My hand reached forward almost on its own and lightly caught his wrist. Noah stopped immediately. He turned back, surprise flickering across his face, but there was no discomfort in his eyes, only quiet concern. I realized what I had done and almost pulled away, yet my fingers hesitated for one impossible heartbeat. "Ethan," he asked softly. I slowly released his wrist, my pulse racing so loudly that I was certain he could hear it. I just... The words disappeared before they could become a sentence. Noah waited patiently, giving me every opportunity to continue, but fear wrapped itself around my voice. Finally, I looked down and forced a faint smile. "Never mind." He studied me for a long moment, as though searching for something hidden behind my eyes. Then, in the gentlest voice I had ever heard from him, he said, "Whenever you are ready to tell me what is really on your mind, I promise I will listen." He walked inside, leaving me alone beneath the quiet night sky. I remained on the porch long after the door closed, realizing that for the first time I had almost asked him not to leave, and the thought of losing these ordinary days with him suddenly felt far more frightening than admitting the truth I had been carrying in my heart all along. The following week arrived faster than I wanted. Every unopened box in Liam's room reminded me that Noah would soon be gone, and every ordinary conversation carried the quiet weight of knowing it might be our last under the same roof. I tried convincing myself that nothing had truly changed. Noah would still be part of our lives. He would still visit. Liam would still invite him over for holidays and family dinners. Yet deep inside, I knew those small, everyday moments that had slowly become the happiest part of my routine were about to disappear. Saturday morning arrived bright and clear. Noah spent most of the day packing books into cardboard boxes while music played softly from his phone. I offered to help, grateful for any excuse to stay close to him a little longer. We worked side by side for hours, laughing over old photographs that Liam had forgotten in a drawer and arguing playfully about whether keeping 20 coffee mugs counted as collecting them or simply refusing to throw anything away. For a while, everything felt almost normal again. By late afternoon, only a few boxes remained. Noah sealed the last one with packing tape before letting out a tired breath. "I think that is everything." I looked around the room that had felt alive ever since he arrived. Now it already looked unfamiliar. Empty. "That was fast," I whispered. Noah nodded. "Life usually moves faster than we expect." We carried the final box downstairs together. As soon as we set it beside the front door, an unexpected silence settled between us. Neither of us seemed eager to walk away. Noah leaned lightly against the wall and smiled with the same gentle warmth that had quietly become my favorite sight in the world. "Thank you," he said, "for helping, and for making me feel like part of the family." I looked at him, knowing that if I stayed silent now I might regret it for the rest of my life. My heart pounded so hard it almost drowned out every sensible thought. "Noah." "Yes." I took a slow breath. "Can I tell you something?" He nodded without hesitation. "Always." I searched for the right words, but they refused to come. Finally, I laughed nervously and shook my head. I spent weeks trying to understand what was happening to me. He remained completely still, giving me all the time I needed. I kept telling myself I was confused. I continued. "I thought maybe I admired you too much because you have always been someone I looked up to. I thought it would disappear if I ignored it." My voice grew quieter. It never did. Noah did not interrupt. His eyes never left mine. "Somewhere along the way," I said, "I stopped worrying about whether what I felt made sense. I stopped asking myself whether I was still the person I thought I was. The only thing I could not stop thinking about was you." I felt tears threaten to rise, not from sadness, but from the relief of finally speaking honestly. I do not know what tomorrow looks like. I do not know what this means for either of us. But I know one thing with complete certainty. I met his eyes without looking away. I am not trying to figure out whether I am straight anymore. A quiet smile slowly appeared on my face, gentle and unafraid. "I learned to love you." The silence that followed was peaceful rather than frightening. Noah's expression softened with an emotion too deep for words. He stepped a little closer, not hurriedly, not dramatically, simply closing the distance between us with the same quiet patience that had defined every moment we had ever shared. His hand rested lightly against my shoulder, steady and reassuring. "Thank you," he said softly, "for trusting me with your heart." He did not offer promises he could not yet make. and he did not pull away. Instead, we stood together in the warm afternoon light, letting honesty replace uncertainty for the first time. In that quiet moment, I finally understood something I had been searching for all along. Love had never arrived all at once. It had grown through ordinary mornings, shared meals, thoughtful gestures, gentle conversations, and the simple comfort of knowing that whenever I looked up, Noah was there. And somehow, without either of us noticing when it began, that had changed everything. The world did not transform overnight after those words left my lips. There was no dramatic change, no impossible certainty waiting just beyond my confession. Instead, there was something quieter, something that somehow felt even more meaningful. There was honesty. Noah did not rush to answer because he never treated important moments carelessly. He simply stood beside me for a long time, allowing the silence to become gentle instead of uncomfortable. Finally, he smiled, the same warm smile that had slowly become the safest place I knew. "You have grown a great deal," he said softly. "Not because of what you told me today, but because you found the courage to be truthful with yourself." I let out a nervous laugh. I was terrified. I know. He rested a reassuring hand on my shoulder for a brief moment before letting it fall naturally to his side. "Thank you for trusting me enough to tell me." We carried the last box to his truck together, neither of us pretending the conversation had not happened. Surprisingly, nothing between us felt broken. If anything, the weight I had carried for weeks had finally disappeared. For the first time in a long while, I could breathe without fighting my own thoughts. Before leaving, Noah turned toward me again. "Would you like to help me unpack tomorrow?" I blinked in surprise. "You still want me around?" A quiet laugh escaped him. "Ethan, I have always wanted you around." Those simple words stayed with me all evening. The next afternoon, I drove to Noah's apartment with a small bag of groceries my mother insisted I bring. His new place was only 15 minutes away, a modest apartment overlooking a neighborhood park where children chased soccer balls across bright green grass while families walked beneath rows of maple trees. Inside, half the boxes were still unopened. Books covered the dining table, kitchen supplies filled the counters, and framed photographs leaned carefully against the living room wall waiting to be hung. "Welcome to organized chaos," Noah joked. We spent hours unpacking together, laughing whenever we discovered another box labeled simply miscellaneous, because neither of us could remember what was actually inside. At one point, we found an old board game Liam had forgotten years ago. Noah held it up with a grin. "Your brother still owes me a rematch. He says you cheated. He says that because he lost." The easy conversation reminded me of the countless afternoons we had already shared. The difference was that now I no longer had to hide from my own feelings. They were simply there, quiet and steady, asking for nothing except honesty. As the sun began to set beyond the apartment windows, we carried 2 folding chairs onto the small balcony overlooking the park. The evening air was cool, carrying the distant laughter of children and the gentle rustling of leaves. Noah looked out across the neighborhood before speaking. "I want to be careful, Ethan." I nodded slowly. "I understand. Not because I am afraid of what you told me." He turned toward me with calm sincerity. "I care about you very much. But your feelings are important, and I never want you to wonder whether they were shaped by gratitude, admiration, or simply spending so much time together." I listened quietly. "Take your time," he continued. "Keep living your life. Finish school. Chase your dreams. If, after all of that, your heart still leads you back here, then we will have another conversation." I smiled through the unexpected sting of grateful tears. There was no rejection in his voice, only respect and patience. Somehow that made me care for him even more. As twilight settled over the park, I realized love did not always ask for immediate answers. Sometimes love simply asked 2 people to keep walking forward with honesty, kindness, and hope, trusting that the right destination would reveal itself one ordinary day at a time. Life settled into a quieter rhythm after that evening on Noah's balcony. Nothing about our connection became more dramatic, yet somehow everything felt more genuine. We still exchanged messages almost every day, but there was no longer any pressure hidden beneath the words. Instead of wondering whether every conversation carried secret meaning, I began appreciating the conversations themselves. Noah asked about my architecture projects, and I asked about the patients who had inspired him without ever expecting details he could not share. We laughed about Liam's terrible jokes during family video calls and debated which local coffee shop served the best cinnamon rolls. It was simple, honest, and strangely peaceful. The greatest surprise was not that my feelings remained. It was that they no longer frightened me. I stopped measuring every heartbeat and every glance, no longer trying to prove or disprove something about myself. I simply accepted that loving someone did not erase who I was. It only revealed another part of me I had never known existed. As the semester moved toward final presentations, my days became busier than ever. Long hours disappeared inside the architecture studio, where models, sketches, and coffee cups competed for every inch of desk space. One afternoon, after nearly 8 straight hours of revisions, my phone buzzed. "Good luck tomorrow. You have worked too hard not to be proud of yourself." Noah had remembered the date of my presentation without me mentioning it again. I smiled before typing back, "Thank you. I hope your shift goes smoothly too." His reply came only a few seconds later. "It always does a little better after hearing from you." Those words stayed with me through the entire night. The next morning I stood before my professors with more confidence than I had expected. As I explained my design, I caught myself remembering something Noah had once said in the truck during those first weeks together. "You always work harder than you think you do." At the time I had dismissed it as casual encouragement. Now I understood that he had been quietly believing in me long before I learned how to believe in myself. My presentation ended with applause from classmates and positive feedback from the faculty. Walking out of the building, I immediately reached for my phone. Before I could send a message, another notification appeared. "How did it go?" I laughed softly. It was as though he had known the exact moment I would finish. "Better than I expected. Thank you for believing in me." A minute later my phone rang. "Congratulations," Noah said as soon as I answered. His voice carried genuine happiness that made my own success feel even more meaningful. "I knew you could do it." "You really did." "Of course I did." There was no hesitation in his answer. We talked during my walk across campus, discussing nothing particularly important, yet by the time I reached the parking lot I realized I had spent the entire conversation smiling. That evening my family gathered for dinner to celebrate the end of my semester. Liam had finally returned from Seattle and immediately filled the house with his usual energy, teasing both of us about who had eaten the last slice of pie months earlier. Watching Noah laugh beside my family, I understood something that had taken me months to learn. Love was never only about longing. It was also about admiration, respect, patience, encouragement, and wanting someone else's happiness as sincerely as your own. Whether our future eventually led us toward the same destination or simply allowed us to remain an important part of each other's lives, the feelings I carried no longer needed to be rushed or hidden. They had already changed me in the best possible way, teaching me that the strongest relationships are often built not through extraordinary moments, but through countless ordinary days shared with honesty, kindness, and quiet hope. Summer arrived quietly, bringing longer evenings and golden sunsets that seemed to stretch across the sky forever. Classes were over, my internship had begun, and for the first time in months my life no longer revolved around deadlines. Instead, it was filled with ordinary routines that somehow felt more meaningful than anything extraordinary ever could. Every Saturday morning, almost without planning it, I found myself meeting Noah at a small neighborhood coffee shop halfway between his apartment and my family's house. Sometimes we talked for hours. Sometimes we simply watched people pass by while sharing fresh pastries and coffee. Neither of us felt the need to fill every silence anymore. The quiet itself had become comfortable. Looking back, I realized how much had changed since the day he first carried those cardboard boxes into Liam's room. Back then, I had been terrified of every unfamiliar emotion, convinced that admitting the truth would somehow destroy everything we already had. Instead, honesty had given us something stronger: trust. One warm afternoon, Noah invited me to volunteer with him at a community park renovation project organized by the hospital and several local businesses. Families planted flowers while children painted wooden benches in bright colors. I spent most of the day helping design a small reading corner beneath a row of maple trees. Every now and then I caught Noah watching me with a quiet smile as I explained ideas to volunteers twice my age. During a short break, he handed me a bottle of water. "You have changed," he said. I laughed. "Hopefully for the better." "Definitely for the better." His voice carried calm certainty. "You stand a little taller now." You trust yourself more. I looked across the park where children chased bubbles floating through the summer air. I think someone helped me learn how. Noah smiled but did not answer. He never seemed interested in taking credit for the quiet ways he encouraged people. That evening, after everyone finished cleaning the park, we stayed behind for a few extra minutes watching the sunset settle behind the trees. The new benches reflected the warm orange light, and laughter from nearby families drifted gently across the open field. Do you remember what I told you on my balcony? Noah asked. About taking my time? He nodded. Do you still feel the same way? I did not need to think about the answer. More than ever, there was no uncertainty left inside me now. The fear had disappeared months ago, replaced by something calm, patient, and deeply rooted. I no longer felt the need to question what my feelings meant or what label they carried. Loving Noah had never been about proving anything to the world or even to myself. It had simply become one of the truest parts of who I was. Noah looked at me for a long moment before speaking again. Then I think enough time has passed for me to answer honestly too. My heart began beating faster, but this time I did not try to hide it. When you first confessed, he continued, I wanted to protect both of us. You deserved the chance to grow without feeling pressured by my response. I needed to be certain that anything we built would begin with mutual understanding rather than uncertainty. He smiled with the same gentle warmth that had quietly guided me through every difficult moment. Watching you over these past months has only confirmed what I already hoped was true. I felt the evening breeze brush softly across my face as I waited. I care about you deeply, Ethan, he said. Not because of one conversation or one season of life, but because every day you have shown me kindness, honesty, courage, and a heart that keeps choosing compassion. Those are the reasons I would like to discover what our future could become together. I smiled so widely that it almost hurt, not because everything had suddenly become perfect, but because nothing felt rushed anymore. We stood side by side beneath the fading summer sky, looking toward a future that neither of us could fully predict. For the first time, neither of us needed all the answers. Walking forward together was enough. Autumn arrived, almost unnoticed. The maple trees surrounding the neighborhood park slowly exchanged bright green leaves for shades of gold and crimson, and cool mornings replaced the warmth of summer. Looking back, I sometimes smiled at how quietly everything had changed. The biggest moments in my life had never arrived with dramatic music or impossible coincidences. They had begun with shared breakfasts, thoughtful conversations, and countless ordinary afternoons that slowly became unforgettable. Noah and I never rushed to define every step of our relationship. Instead, we allowed trust to grow naturally, the same way every meaningful part of our story had always grown. Some weekends we explored small bookstores tucked between old brick buildings downtown. Other afternoons we walked through local farmers markets, laughing whenever Noah convinced me to try something new while pretending he had not planned it all along. We celebrated little victories instead of waiting for perfect ones. My internship became a full-time opportunity after graduation, and Noah was one of the first people to congratulate me. He arrived at my parents' house carrying my favorite cinnamon rolls, insisting that every important milestone deserved something sweet. Liam laughed as he watched the two of us talking in the kitchen. You know, he said with a grin, I always thought the two most stubborn people I knew would eventually figure things out. I looked at him in surprise. You knew? He shrugged with an amused smile. Not at first, but eventually it became obvious that you both smiled differently whenever the other one walked into the room. Noah shook his head, laughing quietly. And you never said anything? Some journeys belong to the people walking them, Liam replied. I figured you would get there when you were ready. Those words stayed with me long after the conversation ended because they perfectly described everything that had happened. Nobody had forced us toward a destination. We had simply grown into it together. One crisp October evening, Noah invited me back to the park where we had volunteered months earlier. The reading corner we had helped build was now surrounded by colorful flowers that somehow continued blooming despite the cooler weather. Families filled the walking paths, children laughed as they chased one another across the grass, and the familiar wooden benches stood exactly where we had painted them together. We sat quietly beneath the maple trees, watching golden leaves drift gently through the air. Do you remember the first time we sat outside your parents' house after you got sick? Noah asked. I smiled immediately. I remember thinking you cared about everyone that way. I do care about people, he answered. But what I felt for you slowly became something different. He looked toward the sunset before turning back to me. Thank you for being patient with me too. I shook my head gently. You taught me that the best things in life are worth waiting for. The evening grew quieter as the sun disappeared behind the trees. I realized I was no longer thinking about the questions that had once kept me awake at night. I was not wondering what label belonged to me or whether my life had followed the path I once imagined. Those questions no longer mattered because the answers had been replaced by something far more important. Peace. I had learned that love was never about changing who I was. It was about discovering who I had always been beneath fear, expectations, and uncertainty. Noah reached over and gently took my hand, his familiar smile carrying the same quiet reassurance that had first made me feel safe so many months before. This time there was no confusion, no hesitation, and no need to hide what either of us felt. As we walked home beneath the glowing autumn sky, I realized our story had never really been about falling in love. It had always been about finding the courage to accept a truth that had patiently waited for us through every ordinary day, proving that the strongest love stories are often written not in extraordinary moments, but in the quiet kindness of two hearts choosing each other again and again.